Welcome back. We have now come to the evolution of the torque calculation-based strategy that has become increasingly widespread since 2008, torque monitoring. This solution was introduced by various manufacturers with the aim of verifying that the whole system, composed of the control unit and the engine and controls, works correctly. To be able to perform this additional verification, functions have been introduced within the software of the latest generation microcontrollers with great computing power, which automotive groups can choose whether to activate and therefore make operational. The presence of the torque monitoring functions became necessary because, after programming a new file in the control unit, whether an official update released by the parent company or an elaborated file developed by a tuner, a certain period of time is required to perform a recalibration of some self-adaptive parameters. During this period, the engine torque could exhibit anomalous behavior, which is unforeseen by the manufacturer. Furthermore, greater precision in calculating the instantaneous torque in the self-adaptation phase prevents the engine from generating a quantity of pollutants beyond those permitted by the emission class to which it belongs. We can think of it as a doctor taking care of patients. The operative heart of the control unit, microcontroller, is in charge of monitoring the state of the motor system, while the doctor monitors blood pressure, pulse, breathing, and more. The control unit, therefore, implements some strategies whose main objective is to monitor the torque generated so that there are no excessively rapid variations. In the very short term with respect to a driving cycle, this refers to seconds or milliseconds. What you see, for example, represents an extreme case that the ECU can manage through torque monitoring, bringing the vehicle into limp mode and thus avoiding the extremely rapid variations in torque generation. It does not experience drift over time, medium or long term, with respect to one or more driving cycles, in the order of minutes or hours. Only a certain margin of difference is allowed in the various operating conditions of the engine. For example, during the ignition phase, idle adjustment, driver request in standard conditions, or during acceleration and other operating conditions. All this is accomplished by referring to the relative maps in the original file. Therefore, the tolerance between the torque generated instantaneously by the motor, its short and long-term variation, and the torque limitation imposed by the limiters present in the original file form the three main calculation parameters on which the torque monitoring software functions, developed by the various control unit manufacturers, are based. It should be noted that each manufacturer can use one or more methods to set up torque monitoring. Precisely for this reason, we will see that there are various cases and as many techniques used to deactivate the limp mode protection condition linked to monitoring, easily reachable after editing our original file. Based on this information, it is easy to understand how the maps present in the calibration files, which are used as a reference for the monitoring functions, can have different names and units of measurement. In this video, we will only deal with the most common types of maps and their units of measurement. While in the specific modules of each training course for turbo diesel vehicles, the exact names of the maps that need to be modified and their relative modification strategy will be indicated. Let's now take a look at some basic notions for all the control units and the relative modification methods with a convenient diagram. This table shows 4 different types of maps in the typology column. The associated unit of measure column shows the unit of measure for the values in each map. The last column indicates the type of modification strategy. Let's take the third row. In this case, the map to open is torque monitoring, which shows the values in torque percentage or Newton meters. The strategy for changing these values is to overwrite them with either 0% or 100%. Let's do some examples right away to clarify the ideas. Let's take the first map called torque monitoring as a reference, which is very common within the latest generation of 17 Bosch control units. The map represents the offset percentages relating to the engine torque, calculated internally as a function of the engine revolutions and the coolant temperature, and defines the maximum tolerance with which the calculated engine torque can deviate from a target value of maximum torque set within the ECU. If the tuner wants to inhibit the operation of torque monitoring, he will simply have to raise all the values within the map to the maximum possible, and thus allow greater tolerance. This other map, called the torque required during acceleration map, on the other hand, represents a percentage of maximum allowed torque as a function of the engine speed and the percentage of accelerator pedal pressed, and works in close contact with the maps related to the torque request. We can therefore say that if the engine torque, calculated internally by the control unit, is higher than the percentage defined by this map and requested by the driver via the accelerator pedal, torque monitoring will be activated, and vehicle operation will be set in limp mode. To prevent the check being performed by the control unit through these maps, it is necessary to raise the values to the maximum percentage, making it possible to effectively generate all the required torque. In addition to the software functions that compare the calculated motor torque value with the torque actually generated, and thus understanding if this behaves anomalously with the expected performance, the manufacturers have implemented a portion of the diagnosis to signal the anomaly through multiple fault codes. The diagnostic trouble codes, or DTC, are mainly of two types. Generic: codes that have a common structure and meaning for all car manufacturers or groups. Some examples may be Internal Control Module Torque Calculation Performance. The DTC is activated when the calculated engine torque exceeds that expressed within the monitoring maps. Internal Control Module Torque Performance. The DTC activates when the calculated motor torque is greater than that which the motor can actually generate. Torque Management System. Forced Engine Shutdown. The DTC is activated when the maximum engine RPM threshold is exceeded. This cuts off the injected fuel and resets itself when the engine RPMs drop below the limitation. Specific: codes that have a custom structure or meaning for each automotive manufacturer or group. Let's quickly look at examples from two well-known automotive groups. For the Volkswagen Auto Group, the codes are Engine Torque Monitoring 2 Control Limit Exceeded. DTC activates when the internally calculated engine torque is incorrect. Engine Torque Monitoring Adaptation at Limit. The DTC is activated when the tolerance allowed by the torque monitoring is exceeded. For the BMW Group, rather, we have Control Module Self-Test, Torque Monitoring. These errors can almost always be identified and displayed exclusively by using diagnostic tools that can be connected to the OBD2 socket. It should be emphasized that generic codes can also be detected with a very simple, generic, low-cost instrument. However, with the specific codes, it is necessary to have much more expensive diagnostic instruments, such as pass-through diagnostic testers. The use of generic or specific codes does not depend on the ECU manufacturer, but on the vehicle manufacturer. In fact, this customization is required by the ECU manufacturer when designing the new engine or vehicle. You should know that torque monitoring has been implemented since the 16th generation of Bosch EDC control units. In the early 2000s, for diesel-powered engines, although it remained disabled, or, in any case, with very high tolerances, they have only been activated and associated with the relevant fault codes from generation 17. Knowing what torque monitoring is and how it works is fundamental for the tuner, since if one or more fault codes were active after programming the ECU with a modified file, the following problems could occur. Storage of fault codes. Engine warning light on dashboard off and vehicle able to start regularly, as happens on Mercedes. Storage of fault codes. Engine warning light on the dashboard and vehicle capable of starting regularly, as happens, for example, on Stellantis Group vehicles. Storage of fault codes. Engine warning light on dashboard on and vehicle unable to start, such as on BMW cars. Torque monitoring has recently undergone an evolution that involves the addition of new software strategies that also require continuous control of the engine power, performed thanks to various calculations made by the ECU microcontroller. This has resulted in the addition of new reference maps in the original files. The power limitation maps, which are normally represented in kilowatts. We can therefore define torque monitoring as a real, permanent control system, integrated into the operating system of the microcontrollers, and is used to measure actual instant torque to the shaft, its mathematical average, also the instantaneous and average power generated. From this, we understand that the engine RPM sensor that is mainly involved in the calculations of the monitoring functions. Therefore, we must always check that this sensor is working correctly and that it provides the correct signal to the engine control unit before performing a remapping. Now that we have made a detailed study of all the engine control strategies used by the various engine control unit manufacturers, starting from the simplest up to the most advanced, we just have to get to the heart of the action and learn how to correctly remap the original file of a diesel engine. Be ready! See you in the next video.